Will.
Sorry.
Alright, guys. So, this is the third installment of the Colors Willdip fanfiction. Do you want to read the title, Will?
To summon or not to summon?
And we are really sorry about the delay. It has been really busy, but we did put some filter stuff on the channel. Special thanks to Katsu and Amaimon.
Yeah, hope you enjoy the show and,
Bye, Gold!
have a nice day.
Bye! Mabel and Stanley stared at Dipper, looking at him as though he had lost his mind.
Dipper, this isn't some sort of baby werewolf or some sort of shapeshifter we're dealing with here. This is a demon.
Great Uncle Stanley yelled to Dipper. Dipper sighed.
Yes, I'm well aware of that. But honestly, look at this image and the description below. He looks and sounds perfectly harmless.
Dipper replied. Stanley rolled his eyes at this.
Yeah, I'm sure you think a loaded gun is cute and harmless as well.
Stanley muttered, but it was loud enough that both Dipper and Mabel could hear it.
You old fool.
Dipper started to say, but Mabel quickly cut in. She had had enough of their bickering for one day, and decided it was best to involve herself. Great Uncle Stanley, I think Dipper has a point for once, Mabel said. She kept her voice as sweet as possible, but there was still a bitter edge to it. Mabel despised having to be the one to break up most of the fights in the family, but knew that in order to actually help it all, she had to maintain her perfect sweet appearance. Dipper stared at Mabel for a moment, shocked that his sister was actually defending him, but his shock was quickly replaced by spite as he realized what his sister had said.
For once? You're talking to me, Mabel?
Dipper spat at Mabel. Mabel chuckled. Maybe you should try and be quiet when someone's defending you, dear brother, Mabel said, telepathically speaking to her brother. The two often spoke this way when they had business that they did not wish their great uncles to hear.
You should try actually admitting your feelings for how things are being run around here, dear sister.
Dipper mentally spat at Mabel. Mabel bit her lip. There were many benefits that both twins saw in communicating telepathically. However, there were also some number of flaws. By using telepathic communication, both twins could not only hear the thoughts that each other wished to show, but both could also access each other's more private thoughts. This also included some basic emotions that were attached to these thoughts. This, both twins could agree, was a terrible inconvenience. Mabel scowled. You could at least have the decency to ask for permission before accessing private thoughts. Mabel telepathically spat at her twin. Dipper rolled his eyes.
If you ever listen to me when I ask for privacy.
Dipper thought angrily.
Hey, is anyone paying attention to me?
Both twins heard a voice call. Mabel smiled at Great Uncle Stanley. Sorry, I guess we're just both thinking of what we would do with a dream demon. Weren't we, Dipper? Mabel said, her voice full of sweetness, and she stared at Dipper. Though her voice was full of warmth, her glare at Dipper held anything but that. Dipper sighed.
Yes, I was figuring out all the things we could do with a demon,
Dipper said, his voice laced with sarcasm.
Yeah, well don't think too hard, because you're not getting that demon.
Great Uncle Stanley muttered.
What?
What? Both twins yelled at the same time. They stared at their great uncle, eyes wide and both full of anger and surprise. Great Uncle Stanley sighed, sitting down on a large chair in the study.
You heard me?
Was all he said as a response.
Why shouldn't we?
Dipper asked.
1, because it's too dangerous. 2, because it could end up costing us more money than it could save us. And 3, because there's no chance that any of us could ever get Stanford to agree.
Great Uncle Stanley murmured. I would not agree with what, pray tell? Have I not already warned you not to speak on my behalf, Stanley? A voice called from the doorway. Dipper, Mabel, and Stanley all turned around and saw Great Uncle Stanford standing in the doorway, his arms folded.
I see you decided to come back to join our important discussion, Stanford. Or did you just forget something?
Stanley snapped. He expected a smart comeback, but was only waved off by his brother. Stanford sat down on the chair by the desk and sighed. Relax, Stanley. I simply had some business to attend to. Why don't you inform me on what's been happening while I was gone? Stanford said. Dipper passed the journal, which was still on the Will Cipher page, to Great Uncle Stanford. Instantly, Great Uncle Stanford's eyes widened. His hands tightly clenched around the journal, and his face had a horrid, twisted smile. We found this, and it was open to this page. We thought that maybe we could use this demon to help us turn a profit. Mabel informed Great Uncle Stanford.
We?
Dipper muttered under his breath. I see, and it just happened to be open to this page. Great Uncle Stanford questioned.
I used magic.
Dipper admitted. Why? Great Uncle Stanford asked.
Look, I was upset by the argument, and certain words that were spoken upset me greatly. My powers got out of control, and I blasted a gust of wind. And that knocked out that book, and it landed on that page.
Dipper blurted out. Well, normally I would punish you. However, it seems that your temper has benefited us this time. Great Uncle Stanford said. Everyone stared at him in shock.
You're really going along with this? Think of all the risks.
Stanley yelled. Stanford stood up, grabbed a cane, and walked over to Stanley. Stanley had no time to move, nor did he have time to block the blow. He stood there as his brother hit him clear across the face with the cane. Do not think simply because you're my twin that you have the right to speak back to me. Stanford scowled at Stanley. Stanley let out a cry of pain as he placed his hand over the now red, angry mark that was on his face. Mabel looked at Dipper, and for a moment he could see her fear. It was only for a moment, but he could see it clear on her face, and for a moment he flashed her a sympathetic smile. That moment passed, though, and Mabel simply looked away from her twin to the book that Stanford was still gripping tightly.
Really letting us summon this demon?
Dipper asked his great uncle. He could not believe his luck. Not only was he not going to be punished for using magic outside of the shows and practices, but he was also going to get a pet demon after all. I see no reason not to, Great Uncle Stanford replied. All right then, shall we get to work on summoning this demon? Mabel asked. She was smiling now. Yes, I suppose we should, Great Uncle Stanford replied. Great Uncle Stanley coughed out loud.
And how exactly are we supposed to do that? We don't even know where to start. We never summoned a demon.
Great Uncle Stanley yelled. Great Uncle Stanford sighed. We will not be summoning the demon, Great Uncle Stanford calmly replied.
Excuse me?
Everyone else in the room shouted with remarkable timing. Great Uncle Stanford chuckled. We will not summon it. We will supply any supplies that are needed, but we, Stanley, will not be the ones summoning the demon, Great Uncle Stanford replied.
Then who will?
Great Uncle Stanley questioned. Great Uncle Stanford chuckled once more, but this one was a dark, sinister chuckle. Why, Dipper and Mabel, of course.